What's up guys? So in today's video we're going to be reviewing LanguageJones. I know a lot of you guys got strong opinions about this guy. I kind of discovered that a couple of videos back where I asked, like I always do, which guy should I review next? And someone said LanguageJones smiley face and I was like, okay. And then that just started like this random flame war between those who like the guy and those who find him really annoying, which is generally quite strange because when I review like language learning videos, the person who's presenting the information, generally everyone like loves them or everyone hates them. There's none of this 50-50. So I had to go check him out. I'm sorry, but I just got it. Now, let's watch his video. We're going to be watching why your language method is set up to fail.
I have an admission to make. I am addicted to YouTube language learning videos. I know better.
Okay, I have an admission to make. I'm not. I don't have time for watching language learning videos, which sounds quite strange because I'm literally watching one right now as I'm making this video. But that's literally the only time when I do watch these videos. And I feel like that's actually quite good because as I watch them, you're getting like a first true impression of what I feel about like the information that's being presented. This is simply because I work full time. I'm developing my own game. Obviously, I study languages and I do this YouTube channel. Just don't have time to watch a lot of videos.
Most of what most of them say is just all kinds of wrong. There's mountains of academic literature on the science of learning, on memory, on second language acquisition, and on language instruction. But there's something just totally engrossing about watching someone ignore all of that and instead decide that they're going to do something crazy like learn Italian by spending a week of 8-hour days memorizing the dialogue in a single man-on-the-street interview.
I've got to see the video that he's referencing. Maybe in the video they're doing something crazy like the guy doesn't speak Italian, now he's just trying to memorize an entire dialogue. That would be insane and totally not efficient at all. But if you're like at an intermediate stage and you understand enough to break down the language and kind of figure out what's going on, then actually that's a great way of learning.
And that there are so many choices for learning materials out there, why is this even a thing? We have textbooks, classes, apps, all at our fingertips, and yet people are...
Well, for one, most people don't enjoy classes because if you have any interest in an actual, like, learning a language and you take part in a class, this is not all classes, I've taken part in a few that were okay, but generally, if you have an interest in language, you take part in the class, you're going to probably advance faster than the class as a whole advances, and you're going to feel like you're just sitting there burning time as little Jimmy in the back, who hasn't paid any attention, doesn't care about the language at all, keeps asking the same stupid questions he should have learned from a bloody semester ago. Okay, the second one he was talking about is like apps. Apps are like, you know, hit and miss. Like some apps are fun, some apps are not so fun, but generally they burn a lot more time than they use, except if you're using specific apps to like help you with learning, such as Anki, but you're not using that as a course, you're kind of developing your own personalized course via it. What was the other one? Books. Well, books is obvious. Like most people just enjoy watching videos, listening to podcasts, you know. We're in the modern age. He's a YouTuber, he knows this, so obviously most people are just not interested in books.
Frustrated with those and motivated to start their own unhinged experiments on themselves.
Okay, I can see why there is some strong opinions about this guy because like unhinged experiments is literally what science is built on, and he's a linguist so he should know this. There's nothing wrong with trying out an unhinged like experiment as long as it's on yourself and not on little children or animals.
Like Dr. Jekyll and Monsieur Hyde. Well, the answer is that a lot of people aren't getting what they want from what's out there. And when I
Exactly.
think about the various methods that I've used to study various languages, I get it. As a linguist, I'm unburdened by the need to achieve a high degree of fluency in everything I study. I can just study stuff for fun. But I can also see...
So he's coming at this from the perspective of a linguist. Just so you guys know, anyone who's new to the channel, I am not a linguist. I don't even claim to be a polyglot. I speak one language insanely well apart from English, and that's Esperanto, and I'm like an intermediary level in Mandarin Chinese. I'm actually a programmer by trade, but I love languages and I play around with them like every single day.
How a lot of approaches are really suboptimal. So today...
And one thing I love doing is reviewing language learning methods.
I'm going to talk about what I think an ideal course would look like.
Okay, there's no such thing as an ideal course. Okay, I'm just going to be straight up, no such thing. Why is there no such thing? Because it's so based on the specific circumstances of the person who's learning the language. Let's say, for a second, theoretically, some ultimate method exists for learning a language. If you are not interested in following that method, for example, I'm a rebel. If someone says do this, I'm like, no, type of thing. So even if there was like the ultimate method, I'm generally not going to follow it because I just like kind of to wander my way to my target and discover things along the way. That's kind of how I am. Remember that most people like to learn in different ways. They have different interests. And then of course you've got like the language problems on top of it. You've got like your target language, your source language that you're coming from, what experience you already have with language learning and languages in general. Do you know any of the adjacent languages of your target language? Do you know nothing about languages? Are you not even capable of speaking? You know, like you got to think about a lot of things.
Nobody's doing this. I don't have the startup capital or even the interest to do something like this. So I'm not going to be mad if somebody else does it. Just, you know, give me a little cut if it really takes off.
This is probably not going to happen then.
If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I have a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and I love languages. On the channel, I talk linguistics, language learning, language use in the real world. Even though nobody is currently doing language education perfectly, you could probably take a lot of these points and optimize your self-study. So let's get into it. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is LanguaJones. So here's the thing. Right up front, let me say that the reason nobody is doing this is that it's hard and language specific. Different textbooks, apps, courses,
I'm glad he covered that, as I already mentioned.
and other resources do different aspects of this well. So my ideal course would take into account both the science of learning, that is both memory and developing communicative competence,
I hope he goes into that science of learning thing. That seems interesting.
and organize a course around language-specific phenomena. It would take into account the most common and useful words and phrases, that needs to be unpacked, and give a clear understanding of the grammar from the beginning. And ideally,
See, this is an issue. What is the most common sentences and phrases you need? Well, it really depends on the person. Now, obviously, there's some really basic common ones that you could say, like, for example, my name is, and how are you type of thing. But then once you get beyond, like, the super, like, introductory type things, what do you need then? Well, you can say, I want that, and I need this, type of thing. But, for example, beyond that point, it really becomes based on your interest.
it's native speaker audio or audiovisual materials and culturally relevant.
And here's another reason why you can't just have the perfect course, because what is native speaker content? Well, for example, if you're learning Chinese, is that just the standardized version of the language that's, comes out of Beijing? Or are we going to be talking about a local specific dialect you're interested in? For example, Chongqinghua or Shandonghua, or you're going to be looking over at Taiwan, So again, it comes down to like what specifically you're interested in.
All of that needs to be explained. And yeah, I know I said native speaker, but we really do need a better term for that.
What's wrong with the term native speaker? Is the issue that, for example, some dialects, as I was just speaking about, are considered more, like, prestigious? Like, for example, English spoken in Britain, America, and to some degree Australia, yes, Australia, is considered more, like, standard or prestigious as opposed to English spoken in Kenya and India? Is that what he's getting at here? If it's not that, I'm curious to know what he's talking about.
So let's start with learning. When I was in high school, I studied French. We had like 2 to 3 classes a week for about 6 class hours a week and homework. And the thing is, the homework was basically learn French. Like, we'd have these lists of vocabulary and we'd be told to memorize it. Easy enough, except how do you memorize something? Say the word over and over again, make cue cards with pictures of the thing and just look at them a lot whenever you remember to? Do what I did and just stare really hard at the list and kind of read it a bunch? My most vivid memory of French class was trying to memorize a list of words having to do with parts of an automobile before I had a driver's license. I remember the weather that day, what room I was in, where all the furniture was.
Yeah, we've all been through this. Like, my own example is when I was in high school and I was studying Japanese. I studied it for like 4 years, I believe. I don't speak a word of Japanese, so don't go off in the comment section, wow, with all your Japanese. I won't have a clue what you're saying. But I remember, like, I studied Japanese for like 4 years and don't remember a single thing. And I remember on one specific day, like 2 years in, we were learning the names of countries and I literally could say nothing at this point. So there's a lot of just like list route memorization that happens at school, and that's one thing that turns people off of languages a lot. I know it like kind of broke it for me, but in fact the actual thing that broke Japanese for me is funny as I remember after 3 years of learning Japanese, I was like, I'm going to write a story in Japanese. Maybe this is a good method for learning. When you think about it, it's actually not too bad a method, but based on my understanding of languages at the time, I was totally not capable of this, because I thought a language was literally this. You take an English word, you translate it, and then you just put them all together exactly like English, and that's how you make Japanese. Like, that's what I thought. I don't know why. Maybe the teacher was bad, maybe I was an idiot, but I remember I was trying to write this story, and I wanted to write the word the. And I was like, how do I say the? We haven't learned how to say the. So I went up to my teacher and I was like, how do I say the word the? And I was like ready to write it down. She's like, Japanese doesn't have a word for the. And I was like, what? That's a stupid language. What kind of language doesn't have the word the? And after that point, I actually kind of lost motivation in Japanese, which is so funny.
The time of day, how frustrated I was, everything. That is, everything but the words. I actually remember learning some of those words years later in France trying to prep for renting a car. Think about that though. My most vivid memory from French class was being frustrated trying to memorize with no guidance. I was a teenage boy with raging hormones, and the time one of the girls in the class wore a very revealing outfit was not as memorable as trying and failing to remember French words.
I stuck around in Japanese literally because I was the only boy in the class. It was like 20 girls. So I was not there for linguistics reasons, let's just say that.
And I have French family, so it's not like I was taking the class for no reason. I could understand the value
Clearly, I didn't have a Japanese family.
Of actually speaking French. So let's get it right. Memory deserves its own video, but rote
Oh, come on, I was hoping you'd cover the whole memory thing.
repetition and brute force are a tremendous, ineffective waste of time. I've mentioned in other videos that images help, that audio from real human beings helps, that mnemonics are shown to work as much as I find them dumb and annoying, and that anything that taps into our baser instincts and our amygdala works. That's arousal, whether it's simply physiological excitement or sex and fear and the
Okay, he's just listing off things that work at the moment. Get to the course, my man.
frisson of a transgressive mnemonic or whatever. I call these naughty mnemonics, by the way. There's also a wealth of research on the benefits of spaced repetition. The way I think of this is that forgetting is part of the process of remembering. That means you can't really memorize something in one sitting, especially not a lot of some things. Learning is a sustained process of forgetting better, if that makes sense. And nobody
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, in fact, that applies to any skill out there. Languages are not special in that part.
told me that. They probably didn't tell you either.
And this is why a lot of online polyglots blow up, because they introduce the most simple stuff that he said there, and that simple stuff gets to the masses of people who went through the same type of language class as we did, and they're like, oh my god, this is godsend, this guy knows what he's on about, I just need to pay for this $300 course to get the rest of it.
programs try to build it in. Asimil has you go through their lessons in a sort of pyramid fashion. Rosetta Stone has spaced repetition built into their core.
I can talk about Rosetta Stone because I actually did the entire Chinese course of Rosetta Stone. Now, the reason I did the entire thing is because I don't like not finishing something. And I can say the first 3 levels of Rosetta Stone are actually quite good. It's got a good level of repetition, it introduces words that are like a good amount. But then as you get to the back end of the course, it just becomes complete trash, where it starts repeating things that you don't need repeated anymore. And then it doesn't repeat things that you do need repeated. And then it just randomly throws in entire new words and phrases, and then you just never see them again. So I feel like when they designed that course, they designed the first couple of levels because they knew people would test them, and they knew then that people would be like, oh, this is great, and then to buy the entire product without realizing that the back end of it is just crap. And the vast majority of people never get to the back end because the vast majority of people don't actually continue learning a language.
Course structure, even though they never really talked about it in that way. Back when Duolingo had the tree, people had all sorts of names for adding new information and reviewing the old as they wended and wound their way through the tree. Duolingo incorporated that into the path, and then, for reasons that are completely mysterious to me, seems to have largely done away with it.
Well, I can probably tell you why, because Duolingo went fully corporate, got rid of all their volunteer teachers, some of which were way better than probably their paid teachers. These guys were seriously committed to their languages, and then just blocked them all. If you guys don't know this, like the volunteers who built these courses, they were literally just, one day, were just all blocked out of the courses. They had noticed that it was coming, but yeah, it was terrible how it went down.
Except in a handful of review lessons. And the bit about unusual things being memorable is part of why Duo had so many weird sentences. Of course, people just remembered the weird and not the words in their target language.
I feel like this is also a problem with Duolingo. They have too many weird sentences. Like, weird sentences work because they stand out. But if every second sentence is a weird sentence, then it doesn't really stand out anymore, and it actually becomes, like, just annoying.
Because nobody knew why there were weird sentences, like, my zebra has a balloon. So now
I actually have a video on my channel, totally, like, sidetracking here, where I bought an entire Duolingo owl costume, and I was wearing it inside my house, like running around and trying to punch things and trying to get through a door. If I can find the video, I'll put the link in the description below, but it's in Esperanto.
I use Anki. Even when I'm doing Duolingo, I'll use an Anki deck that goes with that course.
Okay, I like this guy more now. He's recommending Anki.
Whatever you do, recognize that beating the words into your head isn't a one-time thing. It's a process of first exposure, then recognition, then production. Back when I worked at Rosetta Stone, I would use their course until I got physically uncomfortable.
So he worked at Rosetta Stone. LanguaJones, were you responsible for the back end of the Chinese course?
Comfortable and angry at the reviews. When you find yourself thinking, this fucking word again, you're getting closer to having it in long-term memory. But notice, I said I use Anki now. Anki does spaced repetition great, but not specifically language learning, and the existing decks are wildly inconsistent.
That's why you should make your own decks. You should always make your own decks, because in that way you actually learn when you create the cards. Even if it's like super fast process, try not to automate the process. Try actually learn first, then build cards off of what you learned, put that in Anki, because Anki's meant for review.
And don't take into account a lot of the science around best practices for learning and retaining material.
Okay, I'm hoping he will talk about these best practices.
Ideal course in Dream World would explain the science of memory right up front and then build it in. The next part to unpack is communicative
So he still hasn't explained what the science of memory is.
competence. That means not just learning a ton of words and phrases, but being able to generate them and generate them in the right situations. That means an approach to language that gets learners combining material and generating their own sentences as soon as possible. This doesn't mean immediate, but it means fairly quickly. One way I do this is by inverting the textbook approach. Every textbook I've ever used has said something like read or listen to the following dialogue, and then given vocabulary, and even later given a grammatical explanation.
I agree with him on that. That seems to be like a really big issue with textbooks where they just give you this giant audio segment at the beginning of a chapter with all the words of that chapter and you're just expected to listen and understand it. Like, I don't understand if they're trying to use the comprehensible input methodology here where you're just going to listen, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I can kind of guess what all that means. But every time it's happened, like, I've always just heard those parts and gone, don't know what that is. I guess I'll just wait for the chapter.
I would prefer something to start with the vocabulary. Get you familiar with it. Start scaffolding it into phrases or simple sentences. That is, plug it into the grammar and then see it in action. You can tell people what they're going to learn so they stick around for the fun dialogue or whatever, but dialogue or scenario first is putting the cart before the horse.
Okay, so maybe that's why they do it. They want to get you excited about what you're going to learn. Yeah, he's completely correct here. This is like the worst way of doing it.
So like literally start with, say, rojo and blanco, and then maybe some masculine nouns. Get comfy with those, then put them in simple sentences. The noun is red. Easy.
A better way of doing that, rather than saying the noun is red, build an actual useful sentence, like to say, that cup. And then later on you can learn, I want that cup. Because you're going to use that cup a lot more in the language than you're ever going to use the word noun.
Once you're comfortable with that, which should not be long, then add in some feminine nouns.
Unless, of course, you're planning to be an online polyglot YouTuber where all you do is talk about how you love learning languages.
Mesa es roja, or something. Later, add the irregularities and the exceptions. This could all be like one sitting, by the way. When I mentioned this to my wife, she pointed out that Rosetta Stone tries to do this. I'm not sure if they succeed, but they do like to try to scaffold by providing vocabulary and then using it in context. The same context for every language, though.
That is a big issue with Rosetta Stone. I remember when I did the Chinese course, one word that they just drilled and drilled and drilled was sanmingzhi. I can say that word perfectly fine right now. By the way, for those who don't know, it means sandwich. And for those who don't know, sandwiches aren't exactly very popular in China. I've never used that word, probably beyond this video, in my life.
It's not language specific, and they definitely don't do the grammatical part I suggested, at least not in a language specific way. Language specific is where it gets really interesting, and I don't see people doing this well. Yes, lots of courses have different programs for different languages. The sentences in Spanish Duolingo are different.
Well, this is obvious. This is just a marketing issue. So you're going to target the biggest market. The biggest market is going to be people capable of speaking English, and therefore you're going to assume that the source language is English, and therefore you're going to want to learn your target language based on English. So this is why you shouldn't be like messing around with courses too much, and I have a video about where I talk about, language materials are killing your progress. What you should be doing is literally building your own course for yourself. Not as in like make a textbook or something like that, but grab real content as soon as you can and just start breaking it apart and start building actual sentences based on what you've learned and what you're learning as you're going through these videos. And that way, one, it follows your interests. Two, you know it's real because a lot of these textbooks just have artificial content and in standardized language which actually no one ever speaks. Three, I can't think of a three right now, but you got two.
And then French Duolingo, unlike Rosetta Stone. But they kind of focus on the wrong stuff. For instance, a Spanish course will spend a lot of time on stem-changing verbs. That's where a word like venir, to come, becomes something like viene, he's coming.
Yeah, this is a big issue, especially for Esperanto courses, because they'll focus heavy on the grammar. And I understand why, because obviously Esperanto was designed to have a very simple grammar. But you don't even really need to do that for Esperanto. What you could do is you could just show 3 sentences. I'm running, I'm walking, I'm sitting, and then 3 Esperanto variants where, mi idas, mi sidas, mi... I can't remember what the last one was. Mi fecus, and it's not important. But then you grab those ing endings and you grab the us endings and you just draw a line over the top to the 2, and the person's going to look and go, oh, okay, I get what this does now. Like, you don't have to focus too heavy on the grammar. There's no harm in teaching grammar, but like, you don't need to break down every little part of grammar.
But not everywhere. Venemos. So, ven, bien. But that's not interesting. And other languages do that and just don't even talk about it. French does the exact same thing. Venir becomes vient, but also venez and venons. They're just like, that's the verb, memorize it. By language specific, I mean literally tailoring more explanation and repetition to the things that are harder and more differenter. Guess how many times you need to see reciente or responsable in Spanish to memorize them? A lot less than something like alrededor. That one's actually easier than something less fun. So, more time on the things that are more different. But there's another level to this. In French...
And again, this is a problem with language courses. Even if it's designed for a specific source language and a specific target language, they're going to assume you're going to find this hard. Well, maybe for you it's not hard, but maybe for others it's really hard. So if you're learning by actually looking at real material and breaking down what you're encountering, you're going to figure out very fast what parts you find hard, and then you can focus more on that.
French, introduce feminine adjectives first. The masculine forms are all derived from the feminine, so if you know blanche, you can derive blanc, but not the other way around. So teach it that way. In addition, I want to have the most common and useful material, but nobody can agree about what actually counts for that.
Exactly. No one can agree, so why even bother?
You could do the most common 1,000 words, but you're going to be spending a lot of time on function words like the. So maybe get rid of stop words.
This is another problem. Like, what is the 1,000 most common words? Yes, there are lists that exist online that tell you this is the most 1,000 common words, but the most 1,000 common words actually vary quite a bit based on your interest.
Words or teach them. The determiners that mark gender and so on with the noun. There's options. You could do n-grams, so bigrams, trigrams, but those end up being partial phrases and stuff. And compound nouns end up being way less common
Okay, he's just listing off things now.
than either of the words that make them up. It's a mess. Not to mention that any sort of top 1,000 words list is corpus dependent. More than anything else, though, I think everyone falls down on explaining grammar. And specifically, explaining where it's basically the same as English, where it's important how it's different, and that the whole system is finite and learnable in a quick amount of time. I'm currently working on my Spanish, and the first thing I did was get a good grammar and try to understand the whole structure.
If you have a interest in grammar, and you're a linguist, for example, or someone who's like really into languages, yeah, you can do this. This is a great methodology. But most people, when you try to teach them grammar, their eyes are just going to glaze over. So I don't think you should focus too heavily on trying to teach grammar, especially for parts of the language you're not going to encounter for a while. Just focus on what you need at that time. Break down this massive problem into a small part and focus on the small part.
Not memorize it. I'll do that over time, but just, okay, these are the tenses. These are the aspects. These are the moods. These are the morphologically compound tenses.
Most of those words, most people don't even know what they mean. Obviously, people who probably watch my channel do, but like your standard language learner, it's his first language, he won't have a clue what any of that means.
These are the breaks.
Breaks in the bus, breaks on the car, breaks to make you a superstar, breaks to win and breaks to lose. But these here breaks you up your shoes, and these are the breaks.
You got your condition.
Jesus, that took a while.
You got your imperfect. We use all of these all the time, so it's worth knowing what everything in your target language is right up front, and then working through memorizing it all.
No, I disagree with that. Like, you can cover off the absolute basics. So, for example, tell them, the word order is generally like this. Adjectives generally sit here. Certain things like that. Like, maybe, for example, Chinese, you go, Chinese uses a measured word system as opposed to like a plural system type of thing, and just give a basic overview of these things that you're definitely going to encounter from day one type of thing. But don't just throw the whole grammar at them and be like, that's an aspect.
Methodically as you learn. But we spend months getting to things like the conditional, where we'll spend a few weeks and not combining everything the way it's usually combined in real life. Imagine I tell you a story. Yesterday I was thinking about reading a book when the phone rang, and it was a friend I hadn't talked to in a long time. He asked me if I wanted to meet him at the cafe, and I would have if I had had the time. Maybe we will later in the week. I could really use a visit. I love coffee. Wish I were coffee. Is that crazy? Like, subscribe, and leave me a comment if you wish you were coffee. That stupid story has the imperfect, simple past, pluperfect, reported speech in the past, and an embedded clause, the conditional, the future, and the subjunctive.
If I ran a class, and I've run a lot of classes, and I started listing down all these things on a blackboard, by the time I turned around and looked at the class, I guarantee you probably 80% of the people had already walked out. So this is a terrible idea unless the person has an interest. So maybe stand there and go, so who here loves talking about grammar? And those who put their hand up go, okay, you're going to be in the grammar class, because most people aren't actually interested in this stuff.
Yes, English has a subjunctive. Not to mention declarative, interrogative, and if you count the YouTube call to action, imperative. No, but really, leave me a coffee emoji in the comments if you like coffee, or tell it to me in your target language, or better yet, tell me your favorite type of coffee drink. I am so tired.
I'm going to say something probably a little bit controversial here. I feel like he was just trying to show off then.
Right now, I need the vicarious caffeine boost. So I'd legit start with explaining that there's these 25 or whatever grammatical domains, and we're going to learn them all. Once we learn a little vocab, we're going to get familiar with these structures, and then learn more details and exceptions and so on as we continue.
So what? Your goal is now to try cover off all of those in like one go? That'd be a terrible idea.
But I always find that when I learn a new verb, I want to be able to use it across different tenses, aspects, and moods. I want to be able
Okay, I understand now what he's trying to say. Like, I will teach you how to say this in past tense, present tense, and future tense. But like, most of those other tenses, you don't need to do on day one. Like, that's kind of crazy. Like, come back to those later. Like, even in an Esperanto course, you're not going to be learning all those other types of tenses and aspects and all this type of stuff on day one. Like, just get the basics, okay?
able to use it in a subordinate clause or in reported speech. And I feel like I'm stuck just filing away a partially usable word for later, sometimes for years. Lastly, real people using the language in real situations. The AI is getting out of hand. Duolingo uses AI everywhere, and it's got some wild and frankly very stupid mistakes.
S'il va à la gare, tu l'Y amèneras.
Lots of people ask
Yeah, so there is issues with AI, but I actually think at this stage the benefits of AI outweigh the problems of AI. So it will make mistakes and stuff, but you should probably only be referring to it when you're already at like a intermediate, maybe even like a lower advanced, because that way you'll be able to spot the obvious mistakes. Because when AI makes a mistake, it's usually very obvious. So if you already understand the language quite well, you're going to see if it's going to give you something that looks like, hey, you know what, maybe this is something I need to learn, as opposed to, what the hell, that's nothing like what I was asking about, and that's clearly a massive grammar mistake. But like, for example, for Chinese, AI isn't that bad. When I talk about AI, I mean ChatGPT.
Ask ChatGPT grammar questions, which is unhinged because it's basically
Yeah, don't ask it grammar questions. It's a language model, so it's designed to put sentences together. It's not designed to give you information.
a reasonable looking text emulator and not a thing that, tells you facts. It just shows you something that might look like what a grammatical explanation.
My camera just died there for a second. Put in a new battery. Let's keep going.
Who cares if it's right? You should care. You're going to need real speakers if you have any hope of organizing a course like I just laid out, because French speakers, especially if they know.
Okay, so he's talking about courses, not self-study. Well, that makes sense. If you're going to run a course and you're going to make people pay for it, 100% you should be paying someone to check that crap.
Know any linguistics might know, for instance, to start with the feminine. Maybe. But also, real people trigger different responses in our brains than human-like voices. At the end of the day, nobody's doing all of this. It's really hard, but it's what we should be trying to approximate. Can you learn a lot if you lock yourself in your room and watch an easy Italian video for 8 hours a day, every day for a week? Sure, but it's an absurd waste of time. The problem here is what Donald Rumsfeld once famously called unknown unknowns. I bet you didn't have
Okay, I kind of missed that as my brain had just kind of like switched off for a second then, but I'm pretty sure he just took a jab at comprehensible input.
Rumsfeld on your LanguaJones bingo sheet. The idea is that there are things that we don't know, and we don't know them. So memorizing French adjectives starting with the feminine.
And this is why you take real materials and you break them down and you just learn as you go, because you don't know what you need and you don't want to rely on someone else to tell you what you need.
Is a really solid practice, but how many of you who speak French did that when you learned it? It's one of those things where you realize you wasted a lot of time after the fact. But basically, if you think about these points as you're using whatever you're using, they can be anchors for.
Okay, so I've learned Esperanto and I'm probably good enough to give you advice for Chinese. Here's how you learn these languages. Find something that interests you, learn the basics of its grammar, like the bare basics, and just start breaking down real stuff. And then from there, once you've broken it down, you can see some patterns, start replicating those patterns yourself, and little bit by little bit, you will get there. Don't bother with like courses and stuff like that unless you feel like the course is of interest to you. As soon as it's not interesting, dump it, move on, do something that's going to keep you interested and pushing forward.
For whether you're actually optimizing your time. And that's what it's really about, because you can do all sorts of things, and eventually most will be effective if you just stick with them. But for most, the idea is to learn how to navigate a new language, not just enjoy the process of studying forever. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and comment. If you'd like to support the channel, you can.
Okay, so his ultimate course basically can't exist, as I said at the beginning of the video, because there's not going to be an individual course built for every single person out there, and there's not going to be one that's built for like specific base language to target language based on the interests and needs of that specific learner. So yeah, the best method is whatever method keeps you interested and keeps you going every single day, grinding that damn language. So keep moving forward, and I'll see you all in the next video. And if you're not there, well then you'll be speed running your own death.